My name is David Reynolds, and 3 weeks ago, my parents handed over our family's multi-million-dollar restaurant empire to my younger brother, Michael, while I watched from the back of the room like a stranger. They had no idea that I was the secret force behind their recent success, the anonymous marketing genius who had been quietly building their fortune for the past 3 years. When they finally discovered the truth, the look of absolute devastation on their faces was something I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The announcement happened at the Brass Bell, the fanciest restaurant in downtown Millbrook, Ohio. My parents had reserved the entire private dining room, complete with champagne service and a photographer to capture what they called a historic moment for the Reynolds family legacy. I should have known something was wrong when my mother Linda insisted I fly in from Denver for what she described as just a little family dinner to celebrate the restaurant's 25th anniversary. The Reynolds Family Steakhouse had been my father's obsession since I was 9 years old. What started as a single location in our small industrial town had grown into a respected chain of 4 upscale establishments across central Ohio. Bob Reynolds, my father, had built his reputation on premium cuts, impeccable service, and what he called old-fashioned family values. To everyone in Millbrook, he was a successful businessman who had elevated our family from middle-class anonymity to local prominence. But inside our house, the restaurant business was more than just work. It was religion, and Michael was the chosen disciple. From the time we were teenagers, it was clear that Mike would inherit the kingdom. He was charismatic where I was analytical, outgoing where I was reserved. And most importantly, he shared my father's vision of expanding the restaurant empire across the entire Midwest. I was the older son, but I was also the disappointment, who had chosen computers over customer service, algorithms over appetizers. When I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in marketing and moved to Denver to start my own digital marketing agency, my parents treated it like a phase. They were certain I'd eventually come crawling back to join the family business, grateful for whatever scraps of responsibility they might throw my way. They never understood that I was building something of my own, something that would eventually dwarf their modest restaurant operation. Summit Marketing Solutions. Started in my 1-bedroom apartment with nothing but a laptop and an unshakable belief that I could help businesses grow through strategic digital marketing. While my family was focused on perfecting their ribeye seasoning, I was mastering the art of online customer acquisition, social media engagement, and brand positioning. By the time I turned 30, I was running a 15-person agency with clients across the country, generating more revenue in a month than the flagship Reynolds restaurant made in a quarter. The irony was delicious, though they never knew it. 3 years ago, their business was struggling to compete with chain restaurants and their customer base was aging out. I had anonymously reached out through a third-party consultant to offer my services. The contract was signed under my business name, Summit Marketing Solutions, with no mention of my personal connection to the family. To them, I was just another Denver-based marketing firm they'd hired to modernize their digital presence. Under my guidance, their online reservations increased by 300%. Their social media following grew from a few hundred local followers to over 50,000 engaged customers across Ohio. I redesigned their website, launched targeted advertising campaigns, and created a sophisticated email marketing system that kept customers coming back month after month. The business that had been slowly dying was suddenly thriving, and my parents credited it all to Michael's natural business instincts and leadership potential. Every family gathering was a masterclass in overlooking my contributions while celebrating Michael's supposed genius. Last Christmas, my father spent 2 hours showing me PowerPoint presentations about their incredible digital transformation, completely oblivious to the fact that every slide, every strategy, every successful campaign had been crafted by the son he'd written off as a computer nerd. Michael would nod along, taking full credit for innovations he couldn't have conceived if his life depended on it. My mother would beam with pride, talking about how Michael had really found his calling and how he understood the restaurant business in a way that just comes naturally to some people. She'd look at me with that mixture of pity and disappointment, that I'd grown to hate the expression that said she was still waiting for me to grow up and realize that real success meant following in my father's footsteps. The painful truth was that I kept hoping they'd notice. Every successful campaign, every revenue milestone, every glowing customer review was secretly a message in a bottle, a desperate attempt to prove my worth to parents who had already decided I didn't belong in their version of success. I told myself I was just being a good son, supporting the family business from the shadows. But deep down, I was still that kid trying to earn his father's respect, just using different methods.
Oh, yeah.
My father called me 2 months ago, his voice filled with unprecedented excitement. I thought maybe the moment had finally arrived. He was practically vibrating with enthusiasm as he described the incredible growth it experienced and how they were ready to take things to the next level. He talked about expansion plans, new locations, and the need for fresh leadership. In the digital age, for one foolish moment, I thought he was finally going to acknowledge what I'd been doing, finally going to ask me to come home as a partner, not a charity case. Instead, he was calling to invite me to watch him hand everything over to Michael. The dinner at the Brass Bell wasn't a celebration of the business. It was a coronation ceremony, and I was just another guest in the audience watching my younger brother inherit the empire I had secretly built. The Reynolds family hierarchy had been carved in stone since Michael and I were children, but it took me decades to understand just how deliberately constructed it really was. In public, my parents presented themselves as devoted to both their sons equally, but behind closed doors, they had created a system where Michael could do no wrong, and I could do nothing right. Michael had always been the golden child, blessed, with the kind of effortless charm that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes of meeting him. He was the high school quarterback who dated the homecoming queen, the college graduate who networked his way into opportunities, the natural-born leader who could walk into any room and immediately command attention. Where I was methodical and analytical, Michael was instinctive and charismatic. Where I questioned and researched, Michael acted on gut feelings and somehow always landed on his feet. My father worshipped this quality in Michael. Bob Reynolds had built his restaurant empire on handshakes and personal relationships, on knowing every customer's name and remembering their favorite drinks. He saw Michael as his true heir, the son who understood that business was really about people, not spreadsheets. In his mind, I was too cerebral, too focused on data and metrics to understand the human element that made restaurants successful. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Family dinners were essentially Michael appreciation sessions where my parents would dissect his latest accomplishments while I sat quietly, picking at my food. Michael had closed a deal with a new food supplier. Michael had charmed a difficult customer. Michael had come up with a brilliant idea for the summer menu. My achievements in Denver were acknowledged with polite nods and quick changes of subject, as if my success was somehow embarrassing to discuss. When I launched Summit Marketing Solutions and started gaining recognition in the industry, my mother's response was to worry about my work-life balance. When Michael got promoted to assistant manager at the flagship restaurant, she threw a party and invited half the town. When I landed a major contract with a national hotel chain, she asked if I was eating enough vegetables. When Michael suggested switching to a new point-of-sale system, my father called him a visionary. The double standard was so consistent, it became like background noise, a constant hum of diminished expectations that I learned to tune out. Michael's wife Jennifer only amplified the dynamic. She was a former beauty queen who had married into the Reynolds legacy with clear ambitions of her own. Jennifer understood that her social status in Millbrook was tied directly to Michael's success, and she played the role of the supportive daughter-in-law with calculated perfection. She was the one who organized family gatherings, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who made sure my parents felt appreciated and valued. Jennifer had mastered the art of subtle exclusion. She would plan family events on weekends when she knew I couldn't easily fly in from Denver. She would send group texts about restaurant business that somehow never included me. She would post family photos on social media that captured perfectly posed moments of the core family while I was conspicuously absent. Her message was clear. There was the real Reynolds family, and then there was me, the distant relative who showed up occasionally for holidays. My mother, Linda, enabled this system by playing the role of the devoted wife who simply supported her husband's judgment. She was the type of woman who had built her identity around being Mrs. Bob Reynolds, the successful businessman's wife. She volunteered at the church, organized charity events, and maintained the family's reputation in the community. My success in Denver was something she mentioned to her friends with a kind of bemused pride, as if I were an interesting relative who had chosen an unconventional path. Linda's love was conditional and performance-based. She showered attention on Michael. Because he was following the script she had written for her sons, he was going to take over the family business, marry a local girl, have children, and continue the Reynolds legacy in Millbrook. I had disrupted that narrative by moving away and building my own life. And she treated my choices as a personal rejection of everything she valued. The truly maddening part was how they used my distance against me. Because I lived in Denver, I was automatically excluded from day-to-day business decisions. Because I wasn't physically present, I couldn't possibly understand the challenges they faced. Because I had chosen to leave Millbrook, I had forfeited my right to have opinions about the family business. They created a system where my absence was evidence of my disinterest, but my presence was treated as an intrusion. My father's treatment of me was particularly cruel because it was wrapped in the language of concern and disappointment. Never yelled at me or openly criticized my choices. Instead, he would express worry about my future, wonder aloud if I was truly happy living so far from family, and suggest that maybe it was time to consider coming home and joining the business. In some capacity, his disapproval was delivered with the gentle condescension of someone who believed he was saving me from myself. The restaurant business gave my father a perfect framework for his favoritism. He could always point to Michael's presence, his hands-on involvement, his willingness to work nights and weekends as evidence of his superior commitment. Michael was there for the rush periods, the difficult customers, the equipment breakdowns. Michael understood the business from the ground up because he had paid his dues. I was just the son who had run away to play with computers. What made this dynamic particularly toxic was how it was presented as natural and inevitable. My parents didn't see themselves as showing favoritism. They saw themselves as recognizing Michael's obvious talents and natural fit for the business. They didn't think they were excluding me. They thought I had excluded myself by choosing a different path. In their minds, they were simply acknowledging reality, not creating it. The psychological manipulation was constant but subtle. My father would call me for advice about marketing or technology issues, making me feel valued and included, but then he would implement Michael's suggestions instead of mine. My mother would express interest in my work, ask detailed questions about my clients and projects, but then change the subject when I got too enthusiastic about my successes. They kept me emotionally invested by providing just enough validation to maintain hope, while consistently demonstrating that my contributions were secondary to Michael's. The financial aspect of the favoritism was equally calculated. My parents had always been generous with both sons, but their generosity toward Michael was strategic and business-focused. They paid for his MBA, funded his wedding, helped him buy a house near the restaurant. Their support for me was more personal and limited, covering emergencies and special occasions but never building toward anything larger. They were investing in Michael's future as the family patriarch, while treating me as a beloved but ultimately peripheral family member. This system worked because everyone had a role to play and incentives to maintain it. Michael got the inheritance, the respect, and the status. Jennifer got the social position and financial security. My parents got the successor they wanted and the legacy they had envisioned. I got the role of the successful but distant son, the one who had made something of himself, but chosen to do it alone. The cruel irony was that my success actually reinforced their assumptions about my disinterest in the family business. The more my agency grew, the more they saw it as evidence that I had found my own path and didn't need their support. They couldn't conceive that I might want both, that I might want to be successful and still be valued as a true member of the Reynolds family. In their minds, I had chosen independence over belonging, and they were simply respecting my decision. The first time I realized something was fundamentally wrong with our family dynamic was during my sophomore year at Ohio State. I had just received my first substantial paycheck from a freelance web design project. I was proudly showing my parents the check for $800. It was more money than I'd ever earned, and I felt like I was finally proving that my computer skills could translate into real financial success. My father looked at the check, nodded approvingly, and then immediately launched into a story about how the restaurant's new freezer unit had broken down and they needed $2,000 for emergency repairs. The conversation shifted so seamlessly from my achievement to their crisis that I didn't even realize what was happening until my mother suggested that maybe I could help them out. Just this once, since I clearly had some extra money. Before I knew it, my $800 was gone. It's absorbed into the restaurant's endless appetite for capital. And my parents were talking about Michael's upcoming graduation party as if my contribution had never existed. That was the moment I learned that my successes were not celebrations, but opportunities for the family to benefit from my progress. The pattern escalated after I graduated and moved to Denver. Every milestone in my career seemed to trigger a corresponding crisis at home that required my immediate financial intervention. When I landed my first major client and received a $5,000 bonus, my father called 3 days later to explain that they were behind on their commercial insurance payments and needed help. Bridging the gap until the busy season started, when I secured a long-term contract that guaranteed steady income for my growing agency, my mother called to say that Michael and Jennifer's wedding was going to cost more than expected. And wouldn't it be wonderful if I could contribute to making their special day perfect? The requests were always framed as temporary emergencies, short-term loans that would be repaid as soon as business picked up or the next. Quarterly profits were distributed. My parents had become masters of the financial sob story, painting vivid pictures of potential disaster that could be easily avoided with just a small contribution from their successful son in Denver. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They knew exactly how to trigger my guilt and my desire to be helpful, always emphasizing how much the family needed me and how grateful they were for my generosity. What made this exploitation particularly insidious was how it was disguised. As inclusion, they called for money. They would spend the first half of the conversation asking about my business, expressing interest in my projects, and making me feel valued and heard. They would tell me about restaurant developments, share gossip from Millbrook, and create the illusion that I was still an integral part of the family circle. Only after I felt connected and appreciated would they gradually introduce the crisis du jour, making their requests seem like a natural extension of our conversation rather than the actual purpose of their call. The amounts started small, but grew progressively larger as my agency became more successful. $1,000 for new kitchen equipment became $5,000 for a dining room renovation. $10,000 for a temporary cash flow problem became $20,000 for a marketing campaign that Michael had designed. Each time, I told myself this would be the last time, that once they got back on their feet, the requests would stop. But there was always another crisis, another opportunity, another reason why the family needed my help to keep the Reynolds legacy alive. The emotional manipulation was constant and sophisticated. My mother would call me during my busiest periods when she knew I was stressed and overwhelmed, to share updates about family members I rarely saw. She would mention how proud she was of Michael's dedication to the business, how hard he was working, how much he was sacrificing for the family. Then she would casually mention that he was struggling financially, that the restaurant couldn't afford to pay him what he deserved, that maybe I could help even things out since I was doing so well in Denver. My father's approach was different but equally effective. He would call me late at night, when his guard was down and his vulnerability was showing, to talk about the challenges of running a family business. He would share his fears about competition from chain restaurants, his concerns about the local economy, his worries about whether he was making the right decisions for the family's future. These conversations made me feel like his confidant, like the son he turned to when he needed real advice. When he eventually asked for financial help, it felt like I was being entrusted with saving the family legacy, not just being hit up for money. The psychological toll of this dynamic was devastating, but it was also invisible to everyone around me. My friends in Denver saw me as a successful entrepreneur who had built a thriving business from nothing. My colleagues respected my expertise and sought my advice on their own projects. My clients valued my work and paid me well for my services. But underneath this professional success, I was being systematically drained by a family that saw me as an ATM rather than a son. The most painful part was watching Michael benefit from my sacrifices while receiving all the credit for the family's success. The money I sent home was used to fund his salary, his benefits, his position as the heir apparent, the marketing expertise I provided anonymously through Summit Marketing Solutions was credited to his business acumen and natural leadership abilities, while simultaneously funding his rise and being excluded from the recognition that should have accompanied my contributions. Uncle Tom was the only family member who seemed to understand what was happening. Bob's younger brother had always been the black sheep of the Reynolds family, a high school English teacher who had chosen education over business, books over profit margins. During one particularly painful family gathering, he pulled me aside and delivered a warning that I should have heeded years earlier. We were standing in the kitchen of my parents' house, loading the dishwasher after another dinner where Michael's achievements had dominated the conversation. Uncle Tom was quietly drying glasses while I scraped plates, both of us refugees from the living room performance that was still ongoing. He looked at me with the kind of serious expression that made me stop what I was doing and really listen to what he was about to say. He told me that he had watched my father operate this way his entire life, that Bob had a talent for finding people who could support his ambitions and then convincing them that their support was really an investment in their own future. He had seen it happen with business partners, with employees, with their own father before he passed away. My father would identify someone with resources or skills he needed, cultivate a relationship with them, and then gradually increase his dependence on their contributions while decreasing their actual influence or recognition. Uncle Tom's words were like a cold splash of water on my face. He explained that my father wasn't consciously trying to exploit me, but that he had developed such a sophisticated system of emotional manipulation that he could convince himself and others that his requests were reasonable and his treatment was fair. He had created a family structure where my value was measured entirely by my utility, where my worth was determined by my willingness to sacrifice for the greater good of the Reynolds name. The conversation continued for almost an hour, with Uncle Tom sharing stories about my father's past behavior that I had never heard before. He told me about business partners who had been squeezed out after contributing their expertise, about employees who had been underpaid while being told they were valued family members, about relatives who had been asked to invest in ventures that benefited only my father. The pattern was clear and consistent. My father would identify what he needed, cultivate the relationship necessary to get it, and then gradually restructure the dynamic to minimize his obligations while maximizing his benefits. Uncle Tom's warning was delivered with the kind of love that comes from watching someone you care about walk toward a cliff. He wasn't trying to destroy my relationship with my parents or turn me against the family business. He was trying to save me from becoming another casualty of my father's unconscious but systematic exploitation. He urged me to establish boundaries, to stop enabling behavior that was ultimately destructive to both me and the family, to find a way to be generous without being taken advantage of. I left that conversation feeling validated but also terrified. Uncle Tom had given me the language to understand what I had been experiencing, but he had also made it clear that the pattern was unlikely to change without significant intervention on my part. I was faced with the choice between continuing to participate in my own exploitation or confronting a family system that had been carefully constructed to benefit everyone except me. The tragedy was that I wasn't ready to make that choice. I was still hoping that my contributions would eventually be recognized, that my sacrifices would eventually be appreciated, that my value to the family would eventually be acknowledged. I told myself that Uncle Tom was being overly cynical, that my parents' love was real even if their methods were flawed, that Michael deserved support even if he was getting more than his fair share. So I continued sending money when they asked, continued providing anonymous marketing services through my agency, continued showing up for family events where my achievements were minimized and Michael's were celebrated. I had been given the key to understanding my own prison, but I was still too afraid to use it to unlock the door and walk away. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in September. Just as I was wrapping up a particularly challenging strategy session with my team, my father's voice carried an energy I hadn't heard in years, a vibrant enthusiasm that immediately caught my attention and made me set aside the client presentation I had been reviewing. Bob Reynolds sounded genuinely excited, not the forced cheerfulness he usually adopted when he wanted something from me, but real, authentic excitement that made my heart skip a beat with unexpected hope. He started by asking about my business, but not in the superficial way he usually did. This time he wanted details about my growth projections, my expansion plans, my thoughts on the future of digital marketing. He listened intently as I explained how Summit Marketing Solutions had evolved from a one-person operation to a full-service agency with 15 employees and clients across multiple industries. When I mentioned that we had recently been recognized as one of Denver's fastest-growing marketing firms, he actually congratulated me with what sounded like genuine pride. The conversation took an interesting turn when he began talking about the restaurant industry's digital transformation. He spoke knowledgeably about online ordering platforms, social media marketing, and the importance of having a strong digital presence in today's competitive marketplace. He mentioned how much the Reynolds Family Steakhouse had benefited from working with their marketing firm, how their online presence had completely transformed their customer acquisition strategy. I found myself nodding along, pleased that they were finally embracing the digital strategies I had been quietly implementing for them. Then my father dropped the bombshell that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. He told me that he and my mother had been having long conversations about the future of the business, about succession planning, about making sure that Reynolds Legacies would continue to thrive in an increasingly complex business environment. He explained that the restaurant industry was changing rapidly, that success now required a combination of traditional hospitality skills and modern business acumen, including digital marketing expertise and data-driven decision-making. His voice became more serious as he continued, explaining that he had been watching my career development with growing respect and admiration. He said that my success in Denver had proven that I possessed the kind of innovative thinking and strategic vision that the family business would need to compete in the coming decades. He talked about how impressed he had been with my ability to build something from nothing, to create a successful company in a competitive market, to demonstrate that a kind of entrepreneurial spirit that had originally driven him to start the restaurant business. The conversation reached its crescendo when my father began talking about the upcoming 25th anniversary celebration for the flagship restaurant. He described it as more than just a milestone party, but as a pivotal moment when the family would need to make important decisions about the future direction of the business. He spoke about legacy, about responsibility, about the importance of ensuring that the next generation was prepared to take the Reynolds name to new heights. Then came the words I had been waiting my entire adult life to hear. My father told me that he wanted me to be part of the future leadership team, that my marketing expertise and business experience were exactly what the family enterprise needed to remain competitive. He talked about creating a new organizational structure that would leverage both Michael's operational knowledge and my strategic marketing skills, about building a true partnership between brothers that would strengthen the business for years to come. The emotion in his voice was unmistakable as he continued, explaining that he had been wrong to assume that my success in Denver meant I wasn't interested in the family business. Apologized for not recognizing sooner how much my skills and experience could contribute to the restaurant's growth. He said that he had been stuck in old-fashioned thinking, believing that restaurant success only came from traditional hospitality experience, when in reality the industry now required a much broader skill set. My father's proposal was everything I had secretly hoped for, but never dared to expect. He wanted me to relocate back to Ohio and take on the role of Chief Marketing Officer for the Reynolds Family Steakhouse Group. He talked about creating a formal partnership structure where both Michael and I would have significant ownership stakes and decision-making authority. He described a vision where Michael would handle operations and customer service while I would oversee marketing, business development, and strategic planning. The financial package he outlined was generous and structured to recognize both my current success and my potential future contributions. He talked about profit-sharing arrangements, equity positions, and the possibility of opening new locations that would leverage my marketing expertise to capture markets beyond their current Ohio footprint. He even mentioned the possibility of franchising the Reynolds concept, turning our family business into a regional or even national brand. What made this offer particularly compelling was the timing. My agency in Denver was successful and growing, but I had been feeling restless, wondering if I was ready for a new challenge. The idea of combining my marketing expertise with the family business I had grown up around held enormous appeal. I could envision creating something truly special, building on the foundation my father had established while adding the modern business strategies I had mastered in Denver. My father's enthusiasm was infectious as he painted a picture of family collaboration and mutual success. He talked about working together as a team, about combining our different strengths to create something greater than the sum of its parts. He mentioned how proud he was of both his sons, how excited he was about the possibility of creating a true family partnership that would honor the past while embracing the future. The conversation concluded with an invitation to a special dinner at the Brass Bell, Millbrook's most prestigious restaurant. He described it as an intimate family celebration where they would formally announce the new leadership structure and begin planning for the future. He wanted me to fly in from Denver for what he called the most important family dinner of our lives, a gathering that would mark the beginning of a new chapter for the Reynolds family. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of emotions I hadn't experienced in years: hope, excitement, validation, and a deep sense of belonging that I had been missing since I left Ohio. This was the moment I had been unconsciously working toward, the recognition I had been seeking, the acceptance I had been craving. My father had finally seen my value, finally understood my potential, finally invited me to be a true partner in the family legacy. I immediately began making plans to attend the dinner, mentally calculating how I could restructure my Denver operations to allow for a potential relocation. I started thinking about which of my employees might be interested in relocating with me, about how I could maintain my existing client relationships while taking on this new role, about the incredible opportunity to merge my professional expertise with my family heritage. The week leading up to the dinner was filled with anticipation and careful preparation. I researched the latest trends in restaurant marketing, compiled data about growth opportunities in the Ohio market, and developed preliminary ideas for expanding the Reynolds brand beyond its current footprint. I wanted to arrive at the dinner, prepared to contribute meaningfully to the conversation, ready to demonstrate that my father's faith in my abilities was well-founded. I bought a new suit for the occasion, wanting to look professional and successful when I stepped into my new role as a family business partner. I prepared talking points about digital marketing strategies, customer acquisition techniques, and brand development opportunities. I even drafted a preliminary business plan for expanding the Reynolds concept into other Ohio markets, complete with financial projections and implementation timelines. The flight to Columbus was filled with nervous excitement and careful mental rehearsal. I reviewed my notes, practiced my presentation ideas, and imagined how the evening would unfold. I pictured my parents' proud faces as they announced the new partnership structure, Michael's enthusiastic welcome as we began planning our collaborative future, and the sense of homecoming I would feel as I finally took my rightful place in the Reynolds family enterprise. What I didn't realize was that I was flying toward the most devastating evening of my life, walking directly into a trap that had been carefully constructed to humiliate me in front of the people whose approval I had spent decades seeking. The excitement and hope I felt during that flight would make the betrayal that awaited me infinitely more painful than anything I could have imagined. The moment I walked into the Brass Bell's private dining room, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere was charged with an excitement that didn't include me, a collective energy that made me feel like an outsider at my own family's celebration. Michael was already seated at the head of the table, wearing a confident smile that I had never seen before, while Jennifer beamed beside him with the satisfaction of someone who had just won a long-fought battle. My parents greeted me with unusually formal handshakes instead of their typical hugs, and the photographer they had hired kept positioning me toward the back of every group shot. The dinner conversation flowed around me like I was invisible, with everyone discussing expansion plans and future strategies as if I were merely a curious observer rather than the potential business partner I thought I was meant to be. The devastating revelation came during dessert when my father stood up, champagne glass in hand, and announced that he was officially promoting Michael to Chief Executive Officer of all Reynolds Family Steakhouse locations. The words hit me like a physical blow, but the worst part was watching Michael's face as he accepted the congratulations. The way he avoided my eyes while everyone toasted his success. My mother then delivered the final humiliation by explaining that they had invited me to witness this historic moment because they wanted their successful son from Denver to see how well the family business was doing without him. The room erupted in laughter at what they considered a harmless family joke, while I sat in stunned silence, realizing that I had been brought here not as a partner, but as an audience member to my own exclusion. The evening concluded with Michael giving a speech about his vision for the future, outlining plans that I recognized as strategies I had developed and implemented through my anonymous marketing work. He spoke confidently about digital transformation and customer acquisition techniques, taking credit for successes I had quietly orchestrated while his family applauded his brilliance. As they prepared to leave, my father casually mentioned that I should take care of the dinner bill since I was doing so well in Denver. They had already spent enough on the photographer. The final insult came when Michael slapped me on the back and suggested that maybe I could help them out with some marketing advice sometime, completely unaware that I had been their secret weapon for years. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.